The kettle had just started to whistle when a black car pulled up outside the tiny roadside stall, and out stepped a man in an expensive suit who took one look at the boy pouring tea into chipped glasses and laughed loud enough for the entire street to hear, telling him he would die exactly where he stood, selling tea to strangers for pennies, because people like him never went anywhere in life. That boy did not argue. He simply wiped his hands on his apron, poured the man his tea, and said nothing at all. What that man could not have known, standing there in his polished shoes, was that 20 years from that morning, the boy he had mocked would own the very company that supplied tea leaves to hotels across the country, including, eventually, the hotel that man's own family would one day be forced to sell. The boy's name was Thaddeus Okoye. He had grown up in a cramped one-room home behind a railway station, the second of 5 children, raised by a mother who took in laundry and a father who worked odd construction jobs whenever they were available, which was not often enough. By the time Thaddeus was 11, his father had suffered a fall at a construction site that left him unable to work, and the family's already fragile finances collapsed entirely. School, which Thaddeus had loved with a quiet, fierce passion, particularly mathematics, became a luxury the family could no longer afford, and he was sent instead to work at a tea stall near the train station, owned by a distant relative who paid him barely enough to bring home some rice at the end of each week. He was 12 years old the first time he mixed tea leaves and spices on his own, and even then, something in him noticed how the smallest adjustments, a little more cardamom, a touch less sugar, changed the way people's faces softened after the first sip. If a story about quiet resilience and second chances speaks to you, take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share it with someone chasing their own dream against the odds, and subscribe to Kindness Inspire so stories like this one keep reaching you. Now, back to Thaddeus, standing behind that stall morning after morning, dreaming of a life bigger than the 4 walls of that station. The years that followed were long and unglamorous. Thaddeus worked from before sunrise until well after dark, memorizing the preferences of every regular customer, the railway porters who wanted their tea strong and bitter, the office clerks who liked it sweet, the elderly widow who came every Thursday and always paid a few coins short, which Thaddeus never once mentioned. He watched, and he learned, and slowly he began experimenting on his own time, blending spices his mother kept in the kitchen with tea leaves he bought in small, careful quantities from the market, testing them first on his younger siblings, then working up the nerve to offer a free cup to a few of the stall's most loyal customers. They noticed immediately that his tea tasted different, richer, warmer, somehow more comforting than anything else sold along that stretch of railway platform, and word began to spread in the quiet, unhurried way that word spreads among people who have little else to talk about but the small good things in their day. By the time Thaddeus was 19, he had saved enough from years of careful, almost obsessive frugality to rent a stall of his own, a wooden cart barely large enough to hold 2 kettles, set up outside a busy bus terminal on the other side of the city. His mother worried it was too great a risk, that he was walking away from steady, if meager, work for something uncertain, but Thaddeus had already made peace with uncertainty. It was the only thing that had ever felt honest to him. He named the cart nothing grand, simply, Thaddeus's Tea, painted in his own uneven handwriting on a plank of wood, and he opened before dawn every single day, rain or heat, because he understood something that many people with far more resources never learn, that consistency builds trust faster than talent ever could. For 2 years, the cart barely broke even, and there were entire weeks where Thaddeus ate only what remained unsold at the end of each day. He faced ridicule regularly, from wealthier vendors nearby who mocked his cart, from customers who assumed a street tea seller could offer nothing worth their time, and once, most painfully, from a former childhood friend named Percivalanza, who had gone on to study business at a respected university and, upon seeing Thaddeus behind his cart, made a cutting remark in front of a group of mutual acquaintances about how some people were simply born to stay small. Thaddeus said nothing in response, but that night, sitting alone by his cart long after closing, he allowed himself, for the first time in years, to cry, not out of self-pity, but out of sheer exhaustion from carrying a dream that no one else seemed to believe in. The turning point arrived almost by accident. A woman named Genevieve Larson, a food journalist covering a story on hidden gems of street food across the city, stopped at Thaddeus's cart purely because she was running late and it was the nearest place to grab a hot drink. She was so struck by the balance of his blend, a recipe he had spent years refining, that she asked him, right there on the spot, if he had ever considered bottling and selling it beyond the cart. Thaddeus admitted he had thought about it constantly but had no idea where to begin, no capital, no connections, and certainly no formal education in business. Genevieve, moved by both the tea and the quiet dignity with which he spoke about his years of struggle, wrote a small feature about him that ran in a local paper, describing him as the best-kept secret of the city's tea scene. That single article changed the trajectory of Thaddeus's life. Curious customers began traveling across the city specifically to try his tea, and within months, he had saved enough, combined with a small loan from a sympathetic bank officer who had read the article and personally sought Thaddeus out, to rent a proper shopfront near the same railway station where he had once worked for pennies as a boy. He hired his first 2 employees, both of them young men from backgrounds similar to his own, and began bottling his signature blend for local grocery stores. The work did not become easier. If anything, the pressure intensified, as Thaddeus now carried not only his own dreams but the livelihoods of the people who depended on him. There were setbacks, a batch of tea leaves ruined by a supplier's negligence that cost him nearly everything he had saved, a fire that damaged part of his shop and forced him to rebuild from almost nothing once again, and countless nights spent recalculating numbers that refused to add up in his favor. But each time, Thaddeus returned to the same discipline that had carried him from the railway platform, showing up before dawn, refining his craft, and trusting that consistency, given enough time, would eventually be rewarded. 5 years after that newspaper article, Thaddeus's tea was being sold in grocery stores across 3 states, and 2 years after that, a national hotel chain approached him to supply their properties exclusively, a deal that transformed his small shopfront business into a company employing over 200 people. Thaddeus never forgot where he had come from. He established a foundation that provided scholarships to children in families like his own, ensuring that no child would have to leave school simply because their family could no longer afford it, and he personally funded the renovation of the very railway station where he had once poured tea into chipped glasses as a frightened, hopeful 12-year-old boy. If Thaddeus's journey has stirred something in you, if the thought of a boy pouring tea by candlelight has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video and share in the comments what part of his story moved you most. It genuinely means the world to us, and it helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Before we reach the end, there's one small thing we'd love to ask of you. If you believe that greatness often begins in the smallest, most overlooked places, that a person's beginnings never determine their limits, type the word RISE in the comments below. You never know who might be scrolling through today, quietly needing that exact reminder. It was almost 20 years to the day since that morning by the railway station when Thaddeus, now the owner of a company worth well over $1 million, was invited to a business gala honoring the city's most influential entrepreneurs. Among the guests that evening, older now and visibly humbled by years that had not been kind to his own fortunes, was the very man who had once laughed at him from beside his black car, mocking him for a future he believed was already sealed. The men did not recognize Thaddeus at first, not until Thaddeus quietly reminded him of the roadside stall, the chipped glasses, and the words spoken that morning so many years before. The man's face went pale, and he offered a stumbling, awkward apology, but Thaddeus, much like the boy who had once said nothing at all, simply smiled, shook his hand, and told him there was nothing to forgive, because that morning had never once made him doubt himself, it had only made him more determined. Today, Thaddeus Okoye's name is spoken with respect in business circles across the country, not because he sought recognition, but because he never once abandoned the quiet, patient belief that a life built on discipline and dignity would eventually speak for itself. His mother, now retired and living comfortably in a home Thaddeus built for her with his own hands, still keeps the original wooden plank from his first tea cart hanging on her living room wall, a reminder of just how far patience, humility, and an unbroken belief in oneself can carry a person who refuses to stop, no matter how many people along the way insist that they will never rise above where they started.